Well, I want to get back to Occupy Wall Street, but I also want to talk about your party as well. Mike Lofgren's out with this book, The Party's Over, where he says basically the American people have 1.5 parties. And he's Republican. He says his party's gone crazy, but that the Democrats used to stand for something, and now it seems like because of money, they don't. And here's a quote from him. There is so much money washing through the political system that political action through the traditional party system has been neutralized. To some extent, and nuances aside, Obama has pretty much presided over George W. Bush's third term. Agree or disagree?
I disagree, but I think that the underlying point has some validity. I think that there are certain quarters of the Democratic Party that don't stand any longer for populism. I do. I think that people understood that about me, and that's why corporate special interests spent $5.5 million to defeat me in the last election, because they understood that when I was elected, I owed nothing to anybody but the people, but the voters. I didn't owe anything to the lobbyists. Occasionally, I'd throw them out of my office. And the result of that is that they came after me. That's a problem. It's a problem that has a solution, and that's public financing of our campaigns in America. That's one solution to the problem. There are others. We could certainly restrict the activities of lobbyists. It's amazing to me that we haven't done so already. But the bottom line is that over time the public will realize who's really in their corner and who's not. Some parts of the Democratic Party can't honestly say that they're helping the little guy. They want to put some more jam on the bottom shelf where the little guy can reach it. I feel that way. Many Democrats feel that way. Hardly any Republicans do.
Okay, well,
there still is a difference between the two parties.
Let's talk, though, about the little guys, because you're bringing that up. And Occupy Wall Street, that's what it was all about, really, what these people were contesting and saying that they wanted change. But you look at the history of the United States. Back in the 60s, there was the Civil Rights Movement. There was the protest movement against the Vietnam War. Very effective in pushing lawmakers to make change. This time around, not so effective. So talk to me about that dynamic where money can get you access and can actually get lawmakers to go in your direction, whereas the political process where people go out and protest, it doesn't seem to be as effective as it once was.
Honestly, I think it's too early to say. The Civil Rights Movement went on for more than a decade. The anti-war movement went on for almost a decade. It's real. You know, if you looked at the anti-war movement in 1967, you'd say we've accomplished nothing. But if you looked at it in 1974, the war was over. The same thing is true of the Civil Rights Movement. A lot of people shed a lot of blood in order to make that progress possible, but the progress came. The same thing is true with the labor movement. That took a generation, more than a generation. You know, if you look at the history of the labor movement from the Wobblies in the 1890s until the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in the 1930s, those were 40 bitter years. But in the end, the good guys won.
Okay, now you were talking about Democrats and how they tend to stand for something different than the Republicans, and yet U.S. President Bill Clinton made this fiery speech at the convention, and yet if you look back at his own time in office, he signed the legislation to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act, which allowed commercial and investment banks to merge and really kind of created a lot of the economic hardships that we've seen in recent years. Would you not agree?
No, I wouldn't agree. I think that the Clinton economic record was excellent in many respects. I think nobody's perfect. I think that the trade agreements that President Clinton signed were deeply flawed. I think that the president's change of the welfare system was in many respects questionable and has led to a lot of pain, particularly among young women who have children without a father in the house. But the fact is that that president produced over 20 million jobs. Compare that to what's happened since then. There has not been a single private sector job created in this country in the past 10 years, while the population has increased by 27 million. I wish we had a president like President Clinton who did not have to succeed a president like George W. Bush, who placed everything in disarray, because then the country would be in much better shape economically. Remember that when President Clinton left office, we were 8 years away from paying off the entire federal debt. Now it's $16 trillion.
What's the future of Occupy Wall Street, in your estimation? You said that it's taken a long time for a lot of these movements to really get traction. How long before they really can have an impact?
Oh, I think it's more of the same. I think that people, particularly now that the internet exists and people have ways to organize based upon common thoughts, common beliefs, common values, rather than simply where they happen to be and who's within the sound of their voice. Particularly with the internet, you're going to see more and more of that until the problem is solved. Look, you know, we are now at a point in American history where the distribution of wealth in the country is the worst it's ever been It's as bad as it was in 1929, just before the Great Depression. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We're taking money out of circulation in the economy by putting it in the hands of rich people who have no reason to spend it and aren't going to spend it. And that's going to lead to a flawed structural economy, a structural flaw in our economy, unless we solve it. So, you know, these problems are not going to go away. Occupy Wall Street is, in fact, an answer to those problems. And as long as people seek answers to our problems, there'll be a need for that.
Former Congressman Alan Grayson, thanks so much for your time. Certainly appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.